All right. Hello everyone. My name is Ethan Rancis. I'm currently the grad assistant for the Career Design and Social Work Readiness Office. I'm here today with Nancy Tricamo. Nancy has worked with NYU since 2004 to around 2019. She was an advisor back in 2004 and then also taught classes practice 1 and 2 for the MSW program. Um, do you want to share a little bit about yourself, Nancy?
You want me to talk about my experience, what I've
Yeah.
done? Yeah, while teaching at NYU, I've been in the field. I was working during that time as well. I've been in the field since 1989. I graduated with my MSW. So it's been, I don't know, 40, close to 30, 40, somewhere there in there years in the field. I've worked in very different facets of social work. I started out doing therapy with young people and their families and preventative care in the family court in Manhattan. Then I moved into the Legal Aid Society where I worked, doing similar work, but also with juvenile delinquents and writing sentencing reports and things like that. I worked with young people who were um, mostly homeless in the Times Square area when Times Square was a very different place, mostly with the LGBTQ population, a lot of people doing sex work and things like that in that industry. Uh, then I did psychoanalytic training during some of those years and then opened a private practice. I've been in private practice now since mid 90s, 1995, I think is when I opened my practice. And I now still do that. So I've been in private practice since that time. And I did death penalty mitigation during a lot of those years for about 20 years. So along with the private practice doing psychotherapy, I did death penalty mitigation, which is anyone that's been accused of a crime where the death penalty was a possibility. I worked with the defense teams to convince juries or prosecution not to seek the death penalty against someone. And then when COVID happened and the court shut down for about a year, I needed to find something else to do because that completely ended. And then I started working at the Center for Intimacy Recovery as the clinical director of their therapeutic program, working with people with compulsive sexual disorders and intimacy issues and relationships and all of that sort of stuff.
And that's currently what you're doing now.
I am currently the clinical director as well as I have my own private practice.
Wow. That's a very wide range of different
One of the
professions.
beautiful things of social work. You
I
can do
mean
so
it
many different things with the MSW degree, truly.
I mean
So,
I'm curious about, you're talking about all this previous work that you have done and then going almost to completely different directions through social work. What were some of the biggest, push and pull factors between those?
I mean, I found when I was doing my MSW, I was placed in the family court system. So it was my first introduction to forensic social work. And I really liked it. I had considered going to law school. I took LSATs. I decided against that. I wanted to be a social worker in the legal field, not a lawyer in the legal field. But I really enjoyed that element, that sort of environment for a very long time. So there was a theme that ran through, a lot of the work I did. A lot of the young people I worked with were court involved, in different things. And then the death penalty mitigation, I started, I think, in the late 90s and did it for 20 something years. So that really remained a long time. And I just sort of broke off into two different directions. I had the psychoanalytic work and the therapy work, as well as kind of being in a whole different element at the same time. And I kind of liked the combination of the two because private practice can be isolating. You're doing it on your own. There's not a community of colleagues that you're working with. And I liked having that as well as a private practice. And I really thoroughly enjoyed both parts of that part of my career, doing both of that kind of work. It was really very
Mm.
rewarding. I was very sad when the death penalty work had to stop because it wasn't really my choice. It was kind of, you know, something that happened in the world and made me have to go in a different direction. But I'm actually very happy with where I ended up.
It's because of COVID directly?
The courts shut down in 20, I think it was 2021 or 2020, late 2020, 2021. I stayed on for a little while doing the cases, but no cases were really coming in. You couldn't go into, I had to go to prisons to and jails to interview people, and you couldn't do it. You weren't allowed into the jails for a very long time. So there was some video work, but it was very hard to do the job I needed to do. And you were
Hmm.
supposed to get a lot of home visiting and getting to know people's families, and you couldn't go to people's homes. So it really did shut down and dry up. I waited
Wow.
a year in it trying to figure out if I could still do it, but it really, I had kids in college. I needed to keep working.
Mm. And for any of you that don't know, Nancy Tricamo is my mother. So I've entered the School of Social
You
Work.
were in college and I needed to keep you in
Yeah.
college. So,
Wow. I mean, it's such an inspiration to hear how many different fields that, you had, wet your feet in, but then also like really delved into.
mhm.
Um, I'm curious about what brought you to what you're doing now compared to, I mean, it's such a different field almost.
The therapy, you mean the clinical director with the
The
sex and
clinical director, yeah, I mean, where was there an interest, a prior interest?
not in that
What's,
topic in particular. I mean, it's a topic in therapy people talk about. Sex is part of what people talk about, but I've never thought of specializing in it. I just, I was kind of floundering with what do I do now that I can't do this legal stuff anymore. I saw an ad, on Indeed, and it was the only job I applied for because it was sounded interesting. And the man I interviewed with is the executive director of the practice. It's a small to mid-size practice at this point. I think we started with about 5 people that I supervised, and we're now at a staff of like 20 something. So it's grown over time. And it's been incredibly rewarding. I really like the people I work with. It was more about connecting with the people that were there that made me really interested in wanting to work there. And then
mm,
getting training. I did like a year training and working with people with compulsive sexual disorders and got a certificate in that. And so I've just immersed myself in learning more about it, and it is pretty fascinating stuff.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked to me about it personally in many times, and it's, part of the reason why I've come into this field is hearing all the different things that you have done in your career. Talking about the legal aspect going into something completely, you know, almost completely different, but also there's so many different things that also intersect in a lot of ways. You mentioned it, doing that family work as well as doing psychoanalytic training and how that kind of came together as well. I'm curious about like what were kind of the biggest transferable skills that you learned post MSW or maybe even during your MSW internship that you carry with you no matter what role it is in social work.
I mean, I think no matter where you're working in this industry, you have to learn to connect to people in a very, deep and meaningful way. So just working on those skills of empathy and interest in someone's life experience and wanting to witness what they've been through in any place I have worked, that has always been the primary, goal of the work that I'm doing. So I would say that would be something you're learning in school is how do you kind of get into those relationships with people in meaningful and deep ways where they're trusting you and opening up and sharing their life experience, maybe for the first time. So many of the men, usually it was men who were, in prison or jail for crimes that were murder, it was always murder. So many of those men I sat with, and they're in tears, crying about the things that they have been through in their life and had never told any of these things to anyone. No one's ever asked them about what happened to them personally and how they got to the point that they were at. So, that I just find so profound and rewarding. And that's really the what keeps me in this field, what keeps me in the world. I think that's just the most important part of it, really.
It's astounding to hear the amount of empathy that you were able to display in that room. It shows very clearly for myself. I'm constantly reminded of the value of, or at least for what's coming to mind currently, the value of human connection.
Mhm.
How do you think that's changed in your like that value in yourself and in the field in general? How do you think that has changed or improved or declined in the field in itself?
An interesting question because when I first started, like I did psychoanalytic training I started, I think, in 1995 or four and finished in 1998 or 99.
Could
And
you
at that,
clarify where you got your training, just real
I
quick?
went to the Training Institute for Mental Health in New York. It was a 4-year training program. People
Mm.
don't
And
do
was
that
it a
anymore, you know?
yeah, it's
It's
more of
not.
a 2-year program now.
Yeah, now if people even do that, that's what I was
Mm.
going to say. Like at that time, people were doing psychoanalysis. People were going to therapy 3 times a week. And I never really had people lie on the couch. It was not my thing, but that's kind of the how psychoanalysis kind of started. But people were really engaged in therapy, I think, in a very different way. It wasn't as expensive, I think, honestly. And, people had good health coverage. So if, they could afford to go much more than people do now. And I think we moved from kind of that really deep, kind of intense ongoing, it was much more long-term work to people, and it's not a judgment, but people wanting more of a quick fix and we got into evidence-based practices and, needing to kind of prove that what we were doing was valid and, that was more required in different agencies and organizations. So cognitive behavioral therapy became very popular and like EMDR and different things came into play. So I think people now go to school and then get trained in some of those techniques as opposed to that overall kind of psychoanalytic presentation and way of thinking. And I'm still biased. I think that's still the way to start, even if it's a 2-year program, to really get a really good understanding of how you work with people's internal world before you're specializing in different techniques like EMDR or EFT or ACT or all the things that are kind of out there now.
Wow.
I do think it's changed in that way.
Yeah, I definitely see that even currently as a student, I'm finding that a lot of people are more gravitating towards a more like kind of almost quick fix model as you had described, but obviously not in that general sense. But it's really interesting to see how much the field has changed.
And
Um,
I'm trained in
and
EMDR. I did EMDR training and I believe in these things. I do think there have been trainings that, certificates you can get that are very, very helpful and do move people through the therapy process faster. Like EMDR will help you get into the deep emotional trauma, more quickly than psychoanalytic work might do. So it's a good tool to have. I don't disqualify it in any way or any like CBT. I use those tools too a little bit. Now we have bigger toolboxes, I think.
mm,
But I don't think we come from the same foundation that I may come from, which was like 4 years of like analytic training where we did intense therapy several times a week with people.
wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
interesting.
it's a really interesting kind of point of view that you're coming from. And it's really apparent for me as a student that's, learning about both evidence-based practice as well as the various, facets that psychoanalysis can lead to. I'm wondering if at least a question that's coming up for me personally, and this is more something that's tailored to myself. Do you find that the vice versa of introducing an evidence-based practice can lead to psychoanalysis as well? Or do you find that it's more tailored to an evident like a psychoanalysis leading to evidence-based practice?
I think the latter. I work more from the latter. So I
Mm,
usually would start out with, getting people's in-depth history and childhood history and all that. And then I'll bring in some of those tools if I feel like they will be effective in like people have distortions in how they think about themselves that could come from childhood traumas. CBT can work very well in challenging those distortions. So I will bring that in sometimes in that technique, but it's already come from my gathering of their history and their childhood and having a really good understanding of where they're at. Because I think if you just start CBT, oftentimes you're not getting the connection to the historical stuff. And it can be very helpful, but I don't know if it gives the same long lasting. And that's just my bias. I'm not criticizing people who use CBT as their primary way of working, But that's just, I find it to be a really nice combination sometimes to bring in the evidence-based stuff, following kind of the foundation of the psychoanalytic kind of understanding.
Mm, yeah, I think I think that makes a lot of sense. Something that I've also learned is just in expanding that toolbox, you get as many tools as you like, and then whatever tools you feel like don't fit, then you don't use. And it
Really,
depends on the
though, I think it's
situation.
rare that the tools are never used, and the
Yeah.
glory too of social work is you keep learning. I mean, I just did a Gottman level 1 training in working with couples, and I'm
Mm,
nearly 60. So you're still, gathering information all throughout based on who you're interacting with and where you end up and what you're doing. I think it's a field that offers so much learning possibilities too, and new ways to work and find new methods that are helpful. If they
mm.
speak to you, they need to kind of speak to you and be relevant to what you're doing. But it's so interesting that there's so much out there now too.
Yeah, I think that's totally right on. I'm really interested in also what you're thinking of the future of the field might become, seeing as how we started from a place that felt a little bit less relation or felt a lot more relational, getting into the deep parts of, someone's internal world, going to a behavioral therapy, kind of more evidence-based, almost quick fix, but kind of figuring out the immediate concerns. Where do you think we're going to end up? Where do you think is next?
I mean, that's a big question. I think we're bringing like what's the psychoactive drug tech, ketamine is now legal and people are using that as techniques, the psychedelic use of, different things to help people deal with trauma and addiction. And there's so much possible. I'm so excited to see where your career goes. You're just at the beginning of it. You know, I get to vicariously sort of see how it will go 20 years from now, because
Mm.
I don't hope to be working all, all that time. To
I
see
hope
what.
not for both of us.
Yeah, but I get to sort of see how the world changes in social work through you too, which is beautiful.
Mm, yeah, I mean,
No, it always surprises me where things go. I do think
mm,
the of different psychedelics are going to be part of the field more commonly
mm,
in the next 10 years. I think we are going
that's
in
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that also because of the fact that when I think about psychoanalysis, for example, the idea of using like a tool in order to kind of delve into the unconscious mind a bit deeper is relevant even in the beginning stages of psychoanalysis. You
Yeah,
see it with him.
Freudian.
Yeah, Freud, but Freud also did hypno like hypnosis
Yeah.
in some ways, and you see that
Freud was
now
doing
in
himself, so I think it was more for
right.
his self-exploration. But yeah, so but hypnosis was something then. Still now, people can use hypnosis probably in a very different way, but
Mm.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's just really interesting to see what the field looked like from your point of view, where it's going, and then how that kind of all plays to what you're doing presently. And I gotta say, it is
I
no,
do miss
please.
like not doing the death penalty work. There's a social justice element of social work that I always connected very deeply to, and that was the hardest thing to let go of in not doing that work.
Mm,
Because now I'm really just doing, I do supervision and clinical work only. And I never did just that. This is the first time in the last, say, 4 to 5 years that I've only done clinical work. And I miss, that foundation of social work, because that's what makes social work special to me.
mm,
Psychology, you're not focusing so much on social justice elements of our lives and, kind of always thinking in that way, that it's more a global kind of way of thinking, I think, of individuals. And I do miss being in that part of this work.
mm.
Maybe later on, I'll just do like activist stuff or something when I'm done with all this.
Well, maybe you'll have some time. Who knows?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, we are kind of nearing towards the end of the initial questions I have. I guess the big thing is, what do you want people to take away?
And if this is a field you're considering or you're just entering, I would not pressure yourself too much to try to figure out exactly what you want to do in it right off the bat. let yourself explore, try different jobs and experiences. I did not go into social work to become a therapist even. That was like 8 years into it. I never thought I wanted to be a therapist. I had a really good positive experience in therapy that made me want to do that. So, listen to yourself and what really speaks to you and try new things because you might end up in a direction you never really expected you were going to go in, but you find it incredibly rewarding. And you can switch it up, at 50 years old, like I did, later than that even, to something completely new and different. You know, it lends itself to that. So it's not a boring field at all. You will always find something, I
Mm,
think, that's exciting and interesting to you. And, learning always is a big part of it, I think, as well. Keeping your
yeah.
mind open to learning new things.
And then I guess something to bounce off of that and something that might be relevant for MSW students graduating and looking for positions, looking for jobs. What were some of the things that you tried to focus on when applying to a position that you didn't directly have experience to? What were some of the things that leveraged, you know, how you answered certain questions in that interview process? What were some of the things that came up?
What we were talking about earlier, just sort of those skills of what, is sort of the common denominator, speak to those things, because all jobs are going to utilize some skills that are similar. So promote those skills that you have had in your internships or your first job or whatever, and how it could relate to something new and different for you. And that you will always, if you're doing work in social work, you have some skill that applies to something new and different, which is engaging with people and, empathy and understanding people's dynamics and all of that sort of stuff. It's part of everything. So I think there's that.
Mm,
And just, keep an open mind. And, I think we're at a tough time in social services too, in agencies and organizations. People are, we're losing money left and right for funding those things. So remember that this is a period in time and it will pass, hopefully, and it will, we hope to get to better times, but keep your chin up and try to find what you can find. And it may not be exactly what you wanted to find, but, it could be still very rewarding and something that you really do ultimately enjoy.
yeah. And then I guess even the vice versa of that almost, as someone that went from, entering a field that you weren't very familiar with and now becoming a clinic director at this new place, what do you look for in somebody applying for a position?
I mean, we work in a very sensitive subject matter with you're talking to people about sexual addiction, compulsive sexual behaviors, porn addiction, couples. So you really need someone who's able to sit in that subject matter comfortably. So I do look for that when I'm interviewing someone. And really a desire and an interest in people and just a groundedness as a therapist. I think you really need to have that and an ability to just sort of sit and not need to know everything, and explore with someone. I think that's a big
Mm,
sort of key skill is not needing to have all the answers and
mm,
working with someone to understand their life story.
it's amazing. All right. Well, I think that's going to be the last question that we go over. Nancy or Mom, thank you for taking the time out
Always
of your,
mom
I
to you,
know,
honey.
very, I know out of your very busy schedule, to meet with me. I know that those watching will really appreciate it. So, is there any last bit of information you'd like to say? Maybe some advice for future social workers entering the field?
Stay in it. It's a wonderful, wonderful field to be in. You've made a good choice.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you the next time during our social work journey series.
All right.